Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 37, and today I'm talking to Patrice. Hi, Patrice.
Hi, Lily. Very excited to be here.
Thank you for doing this. I was just rereading your story, and it sounds like you have a host of NPEs in your family.
I absolutely do. And I think even since we spoke last, I have discovered more NPs in my family.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's get into it so everyone else knows what we're talking about. Why don't
Sure.
you go ahead and start from the beginning and let me know what your original family was like?
Sure, absolutely. So I was born in Alberta in Canada. I'm actually my family's from the East Coast. So I was actually the second child born to my mom. My mom had placed a child up for adoption before I was born, which I didn't actually learn about until I was a teenager. But in my original family, it was myself and my mom and my dad that raised me. And then when I was about 6 years old, my parents had my sister, so I have a younger sister, and that was it. So it was just the two of us and my parents, and it was a bit of a rough. We definitely had a rough childhood. My dad was a super great guy. He was, give you anything that you needed in life, but he had a drinking problem, and he had some early traumas in his life that caused him to be quite abusive. So growing up, it was a weird mix because we had great memories, lots of fishing and hiking and hanging out with our families, and we spent a lot of time with our families growing up. But there was also a lot of turmoil that happened in our home that caused for, trauma for myself, my sister, my mom, my dad, all of us. So we definitely dealt with a lot of trauma growing up. Other than that, I spent a lot of time with my paternal or dad that raised me, I suppose, his family. So I'm very close, and still to this day, I'm quite close to all of my paternal side of my family from my dad that raised me. So growing up, because of the turmoil that happened in my house, I tended to spend a lot of time away from my house. So I spent a lot of time with my BCF's parents, so my grandparents on my dad's side of the family, and also aunts and uncles on that side of the family. We were close to my mom's side of the family as well, but for sure my go-to is my dad's side of the family. And so during my high school years, my parents split up. My sister chose to live with my mom, and I chose to live with the dad that raised me. And I lived with him for a few years. He spent some time in and out of jail, so I ended up spending a lot of time, either alone or with my family members. And and in all honesty, without those family members, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. They understood my dad's trauma. He was part of their family, and that's kind of where some of the trauma started. Is that my dad had always been told that his father wasn't his father, and so that's kind of what led me on this path of DNA discovery. Actually, my dad passed away in November of 2018, and shortly after he passed away, we found out my aunt had taken a DNA test, and she had found out that she has a half brother. And so this was the first NPE in our family, my half uncle. So when my dad passed away in November, we had him cremated, and then we live in Alberta now. We're from the east coast of Canada. So in August of last year, we decided to take my dad's ashes to Nova Scotia to bury them at my grandparents' gravesite. And just before I left, we had actually found out about this new uncle that we had, who happened to be my grandfather's son. He had had a baby before he married my grandmother that nobody in the family ever knew about. And so when my aunt did her DNA test, she discovered a half uncle. And when I was in Nova Scotia this summer, my sister and I, burying our dad, we actually got to meet our new uncle. And so it was really exciting to meet a new family member. While I had done that, I had actually sent off my DNA test right before we left. And so when we got these results, we always knew that there was a possibility that my grandfather wasn't my dad's. So we did the test thinking that if our new Uncle Robert showed up on our DNA results, then we would know for sure that my grandfather was my grandfather, or or he wasn't. And so when we got the results back, or when I got my results back, that was the first discovery, was that I was not related to my new uncle, which then made it pretty obvious at first that my dad was an NPE. I guess I should backtrack there, as I did the ancestry test, but my sister actually did the 23andMe test. So we expected to have a match on one or the other because my uncle had done both, because he was adopted. So when the results came back, that was the first thing I noticed. Now, over the years, my dad, we had been estranged for most of my adult life. He wasn't able to deal with the traumas that he had in his earlier life, and his drinking was a big concern. Sometimes when my dad was drinking, one of the things that he would tell me is that I wasn't his daughter. He would tell the same thing to my sister, but I think it's more so me. When he was drinking, he would tell me that. Now, when I was 14 years old, I overheard my parents fighting, and I heard them talking about the fact that my mom had a child that wasn't my dad's. And I took that information and I kind of internalized it. And the next time we got in an argument, I said, you're not my dad anyway, so what does it matter? And I ran away from the house, and I went to, I went to cool off. My dad came to find me and asked me why I thought that I was not his daughter. And I said, well, I had overheard you talking, and so I know that I'm not yours. And that's when I actually found out that my mom had a baby previously, a son that she had placed for adoption when she was younger. So my dad assured me, you're my kid. I was there when you were born. I love you. You're my kid. And so that was when I was young. So there had always been some question as to whether I actually was his child. My sister looks exactly like my dad, and I look more like my mom, or so I thought. So we would always tell people, every time people met my sister and I, she's got red hair, I have brown hair, they'd say, are you sure you're sisters? And we'd say, yes, absolutely. She is, she looks like my dad, and I look like my mom. And so even my husband didn't believe that we were full siblings. But the question was always there, but I think I really honestly thought that he just said it because he was upset. So when I got the results back, like I said, the main reason that I did the DNA testing was to find out if my dad was an NPE. And so I was quite shocked when I opened my records. It was August 30th. I'll never forget. We had been home for 2 weeks from burying my dad, and my results came in on a Saturday. And so I opened the results, and the first thing I looked at, of course, as everybody does, is their breakdown of where their family comes from. And my family, I knew, came from the Czech Republic. Many stories of my paternal side of the family traveling overseas, and we still had the trunks at the house that they sent all their belongings in. So I thought, oh, that's weird, but not really, of course, looking too much into it. I decided to take a look at my DNA matches. And when I opened my DNA matches, the very first person that showed up was a second cousin to me, that I didn't know. And so I thought, that's weird. I know most of my cousins, so that's a little bit odd, but you never know. So I did a little more digging. I typed in our family last name that I grew up with, and I noticed then that I wasn't related to anybody. I knew some of my dad's sisters had taken the test, so I knew that I should be matching with somebody, but I wasn't matching with any of them. The only matches that I recognized were my mom's side of the family. So, I was in shock, of course. It's a bit of a shocking situation to be put into, to look and not see who you expect to see. My mom and I have always had a bit of a tumultuous relationship. I rebelled a lot against her. I felt that she wasn't an independent woman, and I didn't really like the fact that she had to rely on someone to take care of her. She was with my dad, so I always felt like she stayed in that abusive relationship because she didn't have anything else to fall back on. So for me, I always was the opposite of that, in that I'm going to do everything independently. I don't want to rely on anyone. I don't want to get myself in one of these situations where, I'm in an abusive relationship and I have no way out. So my husband, when we saw the record of who my family was or who they weren't, my husband said, maybe before you call your mom, how about you do a bit more research? I don't want you calling and getting in a fight with her if you don't know. So I said, okay. So he went to work. I was home by myself that day. And as everybody does, I started digging through Facebook, looking through the records, making flow charts and lines, connecting people together, just trying to figure out exactly what I was looking at. And then I made another rookie mistake, I suppose, as most of us DNA people do, is that I started reaching out to my top matches and saying, hey, I've just discovered that my dad is not my dad, and I think maybe somebody in your family is my dad. Can you help me? Now when I see other people's stories, I think, oh, geez, they could have just turned around and said, don't ever contact us again. But thankfully, the cousin that I reached out to, she said, oh, this is really interesting. Let's figure it out. So that's kind of where it started, with trying to figure out who my dad was. My next step was actually, I had my stepbrother, or I guess my half brother and I, we have connected over Facebook. I haven't met him in person yet, but we've connected over Facebook. And so my first message was to him to ask what his dad's name was, because I thought perhaps his father was my father, because I didn't know what else to do. And he shared with me the name of his dad, and I said, okay, no, these are not the names matching up. I, of course, had to share with him what was happening. And he said, no, that doesn't match up with my dad. So I thought, okay, it's not your dad. So my next call was to my sister, which of course, I said, I just have to tell you this. And she was pretty shocked in the moment. She's like, I don't know if you're right about this. And I'm like, well, there isn't any other possibility at this time. The science doesn't lie. The DNA doesn't lie. So she decided to get an ancestry test as well, because she had done the 23andMe. So she thought, all right, I'll get the ancestry test, and we'll see. Well, there's got to be a mistake here. We'll show up as full sisters. Of course, we did not. So my next call was to my mom, and I remember quite well. I said, she answered the phone. She said, how you doing? And I said, I'm all right. I have to ask you something. And she said, okay. And I said, well, my DNA results just came in, and, dad is not my dad. And she said, what? Well, I don't know what you're talking about. That's crazy. No, there's no way. Your dad is your dad. I don't know what to tell you. It's wrong. And of course I said, no, Mom, it's not wrong. None of dad's family members are coming up. So I know that this is not right. So, dad's told me in the past that I wasn't his child. You both always denied it. But I really would like to know if there's something that you're keeping from me now, because now's the time. So she said, no, I don't know what to tell you. It's wrong. I don't know why it's saying that. So I started saying the names, the last names that were coming up. I said, how about this person? How about this person? Have you ever heard any of these last names before? They all seem to be coming from the same town, which is a little town close to where we lived, but not the same town. And when I started naming the town and some of the names, she said, well, there might be something. And I said, okay, what is the something? What are we talking about here? And she said that when her and my dad that raised me had split up when she was 19. And they had only split up for a couple of months. And my mom had been, with her friends in this other town, and she had met a man. And she said that she dated him for a couple of weeks, which didn't turn out to be the story that I got when I got the rest of the story. But that was the story, was that she had dated him for a couple of weeks. She had a fling with him, and she never saw him again. And then her and my dad got back together, and they moved from Nova Scotia to Alberta. And I was born in Alberta. So at this point in time, she's assured me that she didn't know that I wasn't my dad that raised me. But, I really have a hard time believing it. It's just, if you've been with more than one person, that you have to know that the possibility is there. I try so hard to think, back in that day and age, I know my grandparents didn't really talk about sex or, contraception with my family. So I know there may have been a lack of education there, but it's just such a hard thing to wrap your brain around.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if, I just don't know. So I said, okay. So she gave me the information. She said, okay, she said there was a man, his name was Jim McLean. I said, are you sure it was McLean? Could it have been McLeod? McLeod's coming up a lot in here, but McLean is not here. And she said, yeah, it could be McLean. It could be McLeod. So I said, all right, well, I don't have anything else to say to you right now. I need to process this. So I'm going to hang up the phone and I'm going to do some research. So I hung up the phone and I reached out to my cousin that was showing up in my ancestry, and I said, "Okay, I got a little bit more information for you." She said, "I've been digging too." So she had told me that her mom had two brothers, one that was a half brother and one that was a full sibling. So I said, "I'm pretty sure then one of your uncles is my dad." And she said, "Okay. Well, based on the names that I said, my mom gave me this name. I'm not sure if it'll mean anything to you, but does the name Jim McLeod ring a bell?" And she laughed and said, "I just need to call my mom." I said, "Okay."
Uh-oh.
So she said, "I'll be back in touch with you." So I said, "Okay, that's great." So not very long later, this is all still the first day. So this is still all August 30th. She messages me back and she says, "Okay, so from what you've shared with me, I think that my Uncle Jim is your dad." And
Mm.
it was like heart pounding. What do I do? I don't know what to do. I'm very confused. I'm going through all of the motions, or not even going through the emotions. I was pretty numb at this point. So I said, okay. It was fairly late at night when she shared this with me, and she said, my mom is going to reach out and I'll be back in touch with you. So I said, okay, that sounds good. So the very next day in the morning, I woke up to a message from her, and she said, my mom has reached out to her brother and he doesn't remember your mom at all. And I said, okay, maybe it's wrong. And she said, no, I don't think it's wrong though. I don't think it's wrong. You came to me in this DNA for a reason. There's got to be something here. So she said, he wants to talk to you. And I thought, okay, sure. And then, of course, panic risen, social anxiety. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know this man. But I said, okay, thank you. She said, I'll get his number for you. So she got his number. She sent it to me. A couple of hours later, she got back in touch with me and said, Jim has contacted my mom again, and he really wants to hear from you before he leaves. He's going out of town for work, and he really, really wants you to call him today. So I said, okay, I will do it. So between her talking me down and my husband talking me down, I finally picked up the phone, and I called the number, and I spoke to Jim for the first time, and he was so friendly. We were both laughing, and we didn't know really what to say to each other. He said, can you tell me the story of your mom? So I had gone back to my mom and asked her some details because I knew he didn't remember her. So I said, can you give me whatever details you can that might jog his memory? So she gave me the story about how they met and he had to drive her home because she missed a drive. And there was a story there. So I thought, okay, he might remember this. So I shared the story with him and he said, no, honey, I'm really sorry, but I have no recollection of this whatsoever. But he said, my family has creeped your Facebook and they took some pictures, which they shared with me. And he said, you look an awful lot like my daughters. So, so I said, well, would you be willing to take a test for me? Because I just really need to know the answer to this. And if it's not you, that's fine, but I really need to know. And he said, absolutely, no problem. Send me a test. I'll take it. I'm really intrigued. I'd really like to know what's happening here. So I said, okay. So I hung up the phone with him and, he said, okay, well, we'll talk more when you get the results back. And I said, okay, that's great. I really didn't expect to hear from him at all after that. I went onto Amazon and I put a test in my cart, and then I went to hit that purchase button and I just couldn't do it. I got cold feet and I thought, I don't know if I want to know. So I thought, I don't know. I'm just not going to send it to him. The next day, my husband said, did you send the test? And I said, no, no, I didn't. And he said, well, you need to do it. And I said, I know, but I'm scared. And he said, yeah, but you're going to continue to be scared until you do it. So you may as well just do it. So I sent Jim the test. He got it the day he was actually leaving to go out of town. And he texted me and he said, I just want to let you know the test arrived this morning. I've spit in the tube. I gave it to my wife. She's going to drop it off at the post office for me while I'm gone. And so we'll know soon. And so for the next 6 weeks, I think he probably called me or texted me every day. He was checking in on me. He told me even if the results came back negative, that he had, so much love to give. And he was happy to take on myself and my sister, knowing our dad passed away. And, he was so kind and we just had so many things in common. I just had an immediate bond with him. So then 6 weeks later, it was October 14th. I woke up in the morning and my dad had been in, or I guess my bio dad now had been in the airport, and his results had came in. And so the text that I received from him is, I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly, but I think I have another daughter. And then he followed up with a screenshot and said, I'm so happy. Yep, I'm right. I'm so happy. I'm so proud that you're my daughter, and you can call me dad if you want to.
Oh, that's sweet.
It was really sweet. It was really, really sweet. And he was so kind. And it's good because it brings up all these great memories. And I haven't had a dad in my life for most of my adult life, other than, some step in with my uncles that definitely helped me out with things. But I just really haven't had, an active father figure in a really long time. And I mean, I'm 40 years old now. I found this out 2 weeks before my 40th birthday. And so it's not that I really necessarily needed a dad, but it's nice to have a dad figure that you can talk to about things. So that's been really interesting for me. But that's how we found out. And since that time, I've been in contact. So I have three. So I have three more half sisters now, and I also have a couple of nieces and a couple of nephews. And so we now have a family Facebook chat. I've talked to a couple of my sisters on the phone. One of them we haven't connected on the phone yet, but we talk over text and that sort of thing. So it's been really great. It's been a really great experience in terms of, finding out so quickly, because I know that's not the case for most people. Most people take a long time or don't find out. So I was very fortunate that way to be able to find out quickly. The one thing I guess I kind of skipped over there, which I probably shouldn't, is how I felt, from August 30th up until, I want to say, maybe just a month or two ago, the devastation that this causes somebody to one day wake up and and look at yourself in the mirror, and all those things that you thought about yourself that match these family members, and then you find out that no, what you're looking for there, when you look at your eyes and you think you see so and so's eyes, you actually don't. It was, as I've heard a lot of people say, it was an identity crisis. I had to take a couple of months off work. I was thinking about changing my last name, even though I just got married. I've been thinking about changing my name on my birth certificate. Um, I share a lot of family history, and that's the weird thing is I have a living history with my BCF's family, but I have a family history with my bio dad. So it's been a really hard road, even though it's been such a blessing for me. It's been so difficult to try and sort through how I feel, and it changes you so completely that as many times people can say you're the same person, he was your dad, like that doesn't change. No, it doesn't change physically who I am, but it definitely changes emotionally who I am. And I think that's been the hardest part is trying to figure out who I am now and where I fit into all of these worlds, because I'm still close to my, my BCF family. They are my family. They've all given me 100% support on this and shared with me, hey, we want to talk to your dad, your bio dad. We'll tell him who you are. We want to make sure he knows what a great person you are. And they've been super great at supporting me through this, and I'm thankful for that because it hasn't been that way. The support from my mom has been a little bit back and forth. My mom and I have never really gotten along, and this really hasn't made that situation any better. She doesn't really understand the grasp of what's happened. For example, I shared with her that that she had robbed me of 40 years of my life. And she said, well, I don't know how that's possible, Patrice, because I didn't know that he wasn't your dad. And I said, okay, you didn't know, or you say you didn't know, but there had to be some inkling, and even if there wasn't, I need you to apologize for robbing me of the 40 years of my life, not telling me it didn't happen because you didn't know. That part doesn't matter to me, and the fact that I came to both of my parents when I was a teenager and asked, are you sure that I'm, and so many questions over the years. How do you not look at me and see that I don't look anything like my sister? I don't look anything like my dad. I actually look like my biological dad, and I actually look quite a bit like my sisters. So it's been an interest. And actually, one of my sisters she's only a month younger than me, so she's also 40, and she turned 40 a month after me. So that's been a little bit interesting. She was always the oldest, and now I'm still the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been quite interesting for me. Something I heard in your podcast a couple of weeks ago that I really hit home for me was she had one of the ladies that you were interviewing had said that she doesn't feel 100% like she fits into her new family anymore, and she doesn't feel like she fits into her old family anymore. And that's exactly how I feel. I love my new family. They're awesome, but there's a piece now that I don't share with them. And then my new family, I love them. They're so supportive, but I don't share any of those family histories. I have no private jokes with them. There's all of those things that you build as a family. I don't have those, and I know that we have years to get there, but it definitely feels like I missed out quite a bit
Yeah.
on them, and they missed out on me too.
Yeah. Like you said, you were robbed of years. I understand that completely.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing too because there's no resolution. There is no resolution on it. There's no way to get a resolution on it other than moving forward. But it's difficult. It's difficult to move forward when you're hanging onto these old, wounds.
So what was your father's marital status, you think, at the point of your conception?
Oh, so yeah, no problem there at all. Actually, my dad, the one thing, so my bio dad, he admittedly was a bit of a player back in his younger days. He was quite a good looking man, and so he was actually not in a relationship when I was conceived, and I don't think when my first sister, that's the same age as me, her as well. I think they were both kind of He did end up marrying my sister's mother, so he was married to her for a while, and then they divorced, and he's actually married to his current wife now, who is the mother of my other two sisters. So at the time of conception, he was not in a relationship, and my mother was on a break.
Got it. I
Mm-hmm.
understand. That's what yes, same, same, same in my family.
Well, and it's been so odd because especially with the amount of NPE stories in my family. So since I've now been in contact with my bio dad's family, he has quite a large family, and a few of his sisters, my aunts, have reached out to me, and one of them, she is actually an NPE as well. So she actually found out that she was an NPE when she was a teenager, and she didn't meet her father um, before he passed away. And so she shared with me that through my story with her brother, she's really been able to, one, have some healing for herself, to be able to, be instrumental in getting us together and in contact with each other has been such a great thing for her. But she said it's also brought up a lot of sad memories that she didn't get that closure, with her own dad. So there's been so many NPEs in our story. My dad is an NPE. His dad was an NPE as well. And so we all kind of discovered all of this at the same time. Um, and then my grandparents on my bio dad's side of the family, they were actually both adopted. So it actually makes it quite difficult for us to go any further back, than my grandparents, because there's all these names that are showing up, but with people being adopted and then NPEs thrown in the mix, it's very difficult to actually track down where your family comes from.
Yeah, really. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
everyone's family tree, especially if they're NPEs, the last names are wrong and just a host of confusion.
Exactly. People putting their married names instead of and their maiden names, and that sort of thing has caused some issues. And then, of course, people just not wanting to admit the truth either. That kind of plays into there sometimes with who people are listed. My sister had a really hard time. My sister that I grew up with, she actually had a really hard time when her ancestry results came back, because she said, okay, well, I guess it's true because you're coming up as, we were sharing about 1,800 centimorgans. So we knew that for sure then we were half sisters. And she said, I really don't want to change my tree to say that you're my half sister. Do you really want me to? And I said, I know you don't want to do it for an emotional reason, but for records, I think it's important, if you do find out one of these discoveries, I think it's important to go back and correct the records, because 100 years from now, if our offspring are looking for information, then we want to at least have the most information in there that we can, so that they can follow their stories.
Yeah. And are you documenting this? I thought I read that you were
Yes.
a writer.
I am writing a book. So I've been writing a book now for a few months. And so I'm about halfway through the book so far. And I keep kind of going back and editing it and changing it a little bit. I felt I'm a reader anyway, so I'm always devouring information. And when this came about, it was a really hard struggle to find people like me. I thought that I was alone. I didn't, I thought, oh, this must be the first time this has ever happened, just as so many of us do. And so I started Googling, dad is not my dad. It's kind of how it started. And I found a couple of videos, and it was interviews. And so then from the interviews, I was able to find the Facebook groups. And then from the Facebook groups, I was actually able to find your podcast. And doing all of that research for me, and realizing what lack of information there really is out there, unless you're in the situation and you've been in it a while, and you're a part of the groups so that you actually see the information, it was difficult to find anything. So I thought, the best way for me to heal for myself, and possibly to help somebody else heal, is just by sharing my story. So, coming on here and being able to share my story this way, and also writing a book, which has been so therapeutic for me to just write it down and keep a record. I know that, we forget things over time. And so if I can put it all down on paper and, my children can read it, my new family can read it, and people that are in our situation that are new NPEs and they don't really know what to do. And, they just need to hear somebody else's story so they realize that they're not alone, because I think that was the hardest part, is feeling so alone and having nobody in my life that could understand how I was feeling.
Well, I can't wait to read it because I know I was devouring any piece of information I could get when I found out I was an NPE,
Exactly.
right? Yeah. And I grabbed, Danny Shapiro's Inheritance, which
Yes.
is an NPE story. It is donor conceived, and I was certainly looking for more NPE stories to read. So I'm glad you're writing it down. I'm glad you're documenting this.
I just think it's important, and it's going to become a bigger thing. The same thing is, therapy was the same. I'm really hoping that, that the medical world, they start looking at mental health in terms of, what kind of unique experiences that we have that we need help with. Because when I went to a therapy appointment after I found out, um, it was so unhelpful. I sat down and I said, okay, I'm here. I had seen her a couple of times before, so she wasn't new to me, but I, shared my story with her. And just as I started sharing my story, she put her pen down and she looked at me. And then she just looked at me with this sad expression on her face for the rest of the meeting. She just kept saying, oh, wow. Oh, wow. She didn't write anything down. She had no advice for me. It was really, it made me feel really frustrated. And at the end of it, she said, I'm sensing that you're not feeling anything good about this meeting. And I said, well, no, because, I'm here to ask you what to do or how to process this in a healthy way. And you just seem to pity me right now, and that's not really helping me. I don't need pity. And
Yeah.
she said, okay, well, I've got something for you then. And I said, okay, great. What are we doing? She said, well, I'm gonna get you to do this visualization. And I said, okay, that's great. Let's do it. And so she said, close your eyes. And so I closed my eyes, and she said, I want this is not a lie. She said, I want you to imagine that you're a tree. And I said, okay. And she said, so you're this tree and you've got all these roots and you've got all these branches that mean all these things to you. And I want you to visualize who's on the trees and what's important to you. And I could just feel that I was getting more and more upset with this. And finally I said, okay, I can't do this anymore. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, well, I'm here to talk to you today about the fact that I don't know who my family tree is, and you want me to visualize a tree. It's not helpful. It's actually detrimental to my healing right now. So we kiboshed that pretty quickly, but it was pretty interesting. And as soon as I said it, she said, "Oh, geez, that really probably wasn't the best route, hey?" No, it wasn't. So I'm really hoping that the mental health catches up, because as people are doing these DNA tests, there are more and more people like us. Even from when I joined the group, I think last year, there's probably 2 or 3 thousand more people in the group than there was then, even. And that was just a few months ago. So I'm really hoping that something changes there. But the book is, yeah, I think helpful. I read the Danny Shapiro book as well. And, any other thing I could get my hands on. Somebody that you interviewed had made a funny comment about a book that was like Beetlejuice. The guide to, or the brand new guide to being an NPE. And I thought, now there's a good book title. I hope she does that, because I think it would be an excellent book to read.
I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
Yes. Shelby.
Well, you need to make light of it. If you don't make light of it, you go crazy. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, is that I make jokes. When I talk to my bio dad, we text or video chat or whatever, I make jokes to him about being a ladies' man and things like that. And it's just, we definitely share personality in terms of, it's funny because people say that all the time, that I never really fit in with my family. I didn't really feel like, I always felt like the odd one out. My family at home, I always felt like the odd one out between my sister and I. I always felt like my parents favored my sister, and I always thought it was because I was rebellious. And I was rebellious because I needed to be, to protect myself from what was happening in our house. It's weird that, I didn't really ever feel like I fit in my household, and I always felt like the odd person out. But yet, where I felt most comfortable was with my birth certificate dad's family, and I still feel, the biggest connection with them. We keep in touch. I go visit them, every year. I consider, I'm very close with that side of the family, and so it's been really funny that the one side of the family that I'm super close to is actually the side of the family that I actually share no relation to. And so we find little jokes in there. When I called my cousin and told her, she was like, "Oh, that's upsetting," and we're going back and forth, and then she just stops right in the middle and she says, "Wait a minute, does that mean we're not related?" Like, well, I mean, biologically, no, but I'm still your cousin. That's not going to change anything. We're still family. But once I met my birth certificate father, over chat, COVID has kind of, stopped us from actually getting to meet each other so far. But once I started talking to him, I realized who I am like. And it's so amazing to me, that whole nature versus nurture, that I am so incredibly like my bio dad. We have a similar sense of humor. We like to do the same things. We both talk over each other all the time because we have so much to say. Uh, and I actually have his eyes, always staring at myself, wondering, who do I look like? And now, meeting them over video chat and over the phone, I realize how much you actually have in common with people that, even though you weren't raised with them, you share DNA. And that's been really interesting. We did a family video chat a couple of weeks ago, and it was myself, my bio dad, and a couple of my siblings. And my dad had turned the camera a little bit, and his wife thought actually that I was her other daughter, my sister.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, she said, "Oh, I thought that was Courtney," but it was actually me. And my mom, the same thing. She pulled it. I sent her a picture of one of my sisters, and she had sent it to my aunt, and my aunt said, "Oh, a picture of Patrice," and she said, "No, that's actually Patrice's sister." So that's been really cool. That's been really interesting. Now it's just the part of getting us all together. They live in Ontario, which is, if you're familiar with Canada, we live in more on the west side, and they live closer to the east side. And so we're really hoping this summer, once restrictions are lifted, that we're going to get to finally meet in person. And I'm super excited, but I'm also really nervous for it.
Oh, no, no doubt. Yeah, it would be very exciting, but very, ooh, yes,
Yes,
scary at the
yeah.
same time meeting your new family.
Well, and I
Oh,
try so hard to, to not give too much, and I'm going to pull back here, and I don't want to. I tend to be, I like to talk a lot, and I can be a lot sometimes, and so I'm always thinking to myself, did I go too far there? They don't know me yet. They don't know my personality. I don't want to get, all excited and then, and it not work out. But so far, I don't think I really don't think that's going to happen. The family has been super open to getting to know me. And I've been really fortunate for that, because I know that a lot of people, including yourself, have not been in that situation. And I hope that it helps to hear other people's stories, and because sometimes you see in our group that sometimes a year or two later somebody will finally reach out and say, I wasn't ready back then, but I'm ready now. And I think that's something that we as NPEs need to be mindful of, that everybody is not in the same frame of mind that we are when we discover what's happening. And
yep.
we need to allow other people to have the time that they need to process, before they reach a decision. um, yeah, it's a tough one, because I don't understand how anybody could ever deny somebody in this situation. I wouldn't be that person, and it's unfortunate that some people are that way.
But that's a very good point, is that some people just need some processing time. I
They
understand.
really do. They just need a little bit of extra time sort through it and to figure it out, especially when there's those situations of, the person was already married at the time, and there was an affair, or whatever the case is. We never know what somebody else is experiencing, and maybe they just had a death in their family and they're not ready to deal with another new piece of information, whatever that information may be. I always try to give out the advice to new people when I see it in the groups, just saying, like, take your time. Don't go to anger. Don't go to billboards right yet. You want to just give them time first, and and maybe just reach out and say, how much time do you need? Although I know sometimes you just get no answer there at all. It's been an interesting situation in terms of my mom. So my mom actually, something I forgot to share with you. My mom actually sent my bio dad a message on Facebook, and so he called me and he said, I was at work and I got a call from my bio dad a couple of months ago, and he said, I need to tell you something. And I said, okay. And he said, your mom has reached out to me on Facebook. And I thought, uh-oh, this can't be good. I said, what did she say? And he said, well, she tried to add me as a friend, and my dad actually just recently, my bio dad now, I'm actually starting to call him dad now. I've called him a few different things. We started with Jim, then I was calling him Daddy-O and bio dad, and now I feel like we've built up enough relationship that I feel pretty comfortable calling him dad at this point. So that's what I call him. And he said, well, your mom sent me a message and she said she just wanted to apologize, for the hassle. I don't know if it was hassle, but it was a word, it wasn't a very positive word. Sorry about the hassle that we've caused you, with this. And I'm really sorry about that. And Patrice is really mad at me, and, I just don't really know how to deal with it. And I was pretty upset. I called her and I said, look, if you don't need to have a relationship with him. He's not interested in having a relationship with you. He's a married man. No, I don't think that you were, trying to, hit on him or put the moves on him, but he wants a relationship with me, but he doesn't necessarily need a relationship with you. And so I would appreciate it if you don't reach out to him any longer. Yeah. And she didn't respond to me. I had sent her a message on Facebook, and she didn't respond. And then I sent her another message and I said, I'm not sure if you got my message, but just checking. And she said, yes, one thing I'd like to ask you. And then she put all in capitals, was this your decision or his? I thought, okay, Mom, this is where we're going to go. All right. Because everything is, about my mom, and she's always been that way. And that's just who she is. And so I said, actually, it's both of us. So a couple of days after that, so she stopped messaging him. A couple of days after that, she sent him, neither one of them really know how to do Facebook very well, but sent him one of those funny stickers that is like, I love you, with a big heart around it. She sent that to him after the conversation. So he called me again and I said, oh gosh, I'm so embarrassed. But it turns out she didn't know what she was doing. She sent it to everybody. I was like, oh, please don't tell me she's trying to, cause hassle. And that was my concern. I said, Mom, you've had me for 40 years in your life. This is a new experience for me. I need to do this on my own. I don't need you involved in it. If at any point he wants to talk to you about me, then by all means, but I don't think you should be reaching out to him on your own. You guys had a one night stand. That's what it turned out to be. He remembered her eventually, and he said, "Yeah, it was a one night thing." And I thought that's what I thought. Yeah. And so now she doesn't reach out to him now. But her and I have not really had much of a relationship at all since I've figured this out, because I'm just too angry. Maybe eventually I will feel differently, but right now I can't. Nothing good will come from it. And the comments that she makes sometimes I feel are belittling, or not condescending, I guess, but she just doesn't understand the impact of what she has done to me. And until she does that and is able to not give me excuses as to why it happened, I don't need that. I just need her to say, this is what I did, and I'm very sorry. And I almost wish that she would lie to me at this point. I almost wish that she would tell me that she knew, so that I didn't have this unknown, because that is so hard for me to wrap my brain around as a woman, to think, if I had sex with somebody, I'm going to know who the father of my child is. And, I mean, I have two kids. I know who their dads are, and that's it.
Mhm.
And, so that's been hard, and I wish she would lie. And that sounds
Yeah.
terrible, but at least it would give me a sense of closure. Like, okay, she did know. I can be mad, but then I can forgive. And without knowing the truth, it's been really hard to forgive.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Especially when, yeah, no, I understand exactly when your mom won't admit or acknowledge or validate or be at all
That's
remorseful. It's
exactly it. And
very
it's not about, it's just about validating. I think for the most of it, it's just validating that I feel this way, regardless of how it makes you feel.
yeah.
If I hurt someone, it's not about, I can say to them, yeah, okay, but I didn't mean to hurt you. Well, you still did. The perception is there. And so that's what I need from her, is the validation. And I'm not sure that I'll ever get it. So that's
Yeah.
been that's been a hard one for me. It's been difficult with the lack of closure from both of my parents. My dad passed away while we were my birth certificate father passed away while we were estranged. So I was held on to the hope that when he stopped drinking, that he would be in our lives, and that my kids would know their grandfather. My oldest knows who his grandfather, that the man that raised me, my dad, I guess. My oldest knows who he is and remembers him, but my youngest, who is 14, he doesn't remember him at all. He met him a few times, but he doesn't really know him at all. So um, it was kind of surprising. I talked to my son on the phone the other day. He's visiting his dad, and I said, "Oh, I think we're going to go to Ontario in the summer to meet my bio dad. You want to come?" And he said, "Well, yeah, Mom. He's my only living grandparent." And I thought, or my only living grandfather. And I thought, wow, you are right. He is your only living grandfather. But eh, that's been another thing for me too, is realizing that this discovery doesn't only affect me, but it affects my whole family. And my kids now
Mm.
have a grandfather and aunts and uncles and a step grandma that they don't know about, and other cousins. So I think it'll be
Yeah.
more real for them. It's been quite real for me, and it's taken up a lot of my time in the last year, um, because I've been obsessed over it. But for my kids, they're boys, they're teenagers, they're like, oh, that's cool. But I don't think they've really grasped onto the idea of it. And I don't think they will until they meet the family.
Yeah. I get that. That would be
Hmm.
a lot until it's more tangible.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
If people would like to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
They can actually reach out to me. I have an email account, so it's NPE Patrice. So it's NPEPATRICE at gmail.com. And you can also find me in the Facebook groups. My name on Facebook is Patrice Larusic. So it's LARUSIC. And I'm in all of the Facebook groups. So you can reach out to me through private message or by email, whatever's most comfortable.
Thank you for sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me. It feels good to get it out, and like I said, if one person can identify with me and either reach out or just listening to my story, if it helps somebody, then I've done my job, and it's a part of my healing process as well.
Thanks again to Patrice for sharing today. These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE that would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come, heal with us.